In the 1930s, the beautiful platinum blonde sex siren redefined Hollywood's leading lady. She was brash and self-assured with a smoldering sexuality that both shocked and titillated audiences. But Jean's personal life was even more shocking. She had 3 marriages, one of them to a bigamist with some serious sexual problems, who turned up with a hole in his head under very fishy circumstances.
She was Hollywood's first blonde bombshell, but her life was a whirlwind of personal disappointments, failed marriages, and romantic frustrations. Jean Harlow played a major role in the lives of Hollywood legends like Clark Gable, William Powell, and Howard Hughes. But she was also a divorcee before she was old enough to vote, and later became the widow of a naked man with a bullet hole in his head.
Was this a suicide? Was this a murder? What was this? To this day, it's one of the big Hollywood mysteries.
And unlike the bold, self-assured heroines Jean Harlow played on screen, in life she was cast in an epic tragedy. Harlow became embroiled in one of Tinseltown's most sordid scandals. And as if that weren't enough, throughout her roller coaster life, nobody, including Jean Harlow, knew that Hollywood's favorite new actress was slowly dying.
It was probably a lot of the pain she was going through. I don't know if she knew the end was coming or not.
That's the irony, is that she was doomed long before she got to Hollywood.
On this episode of Mysteries and Scandals, we'll relive the short, sad life of Jean Harlow and reveal the scandal that rocked Hollywood. Her story will be told through classic film clips.
When a woman can love a man right down to a fingernail, she can hate him the same way.
Rare news footage and shocking photographs. We'll also witness gripping reenactments of the night that Jean Harlow's private life became a public spectacle.
I'm A.J. Benza. Join me as we explore the glamorous life and tragic death of the silver screen's first blonde sex goddess and investigate the scandal that began the saddest chapter in Jean Harlow's life.
Jean Harlow was born Harleyan Harlow Carpenter in Kansas City, Missouri on March 3, 1911. Her father, Montclair, was a prominent dentist. Her mother, Jean, who would later become her movie namesake, was frivolous and flighty, hardly a typical society matron. When Jean was 11 years old, her parents divorced. Biographer David Sten is the author of Bombshell.
Mother Jean got a divorce, which in 1922 in Kansas City, Missouri was a big scandal, and immediately departed for Hollywood, tried to get a career for herself, was told she was too old, went back in defeat.
Jean's mother, her dreams for stardom crushed, was determined that her daughter would have every opportunity to succeed in life. At 15, Jean was sent away to a very prestigious boarding school in Lake Forest, Illinois. She fell in love with a handsome and popular young man from a wealthy Chicago family, Charles Fremont McGrew III. Marcella Rabwin was movie mogul David O. Selznick's executive assistant and a close friend of Jean Harlow's.
She was in a girls' high school at the time she married him. And all the girls there were crazy about McGrew, and when he asked her, she said yes, happily.
But the marriage was short-lived. Jean was married at 16 and divorced at 19. She left Illinois and McGrew behind and went home to mother and the new stepfather, Marino Bello, the shady character with ties to the mob. Before long, the three of them set out for Hollywood in search of fame, or at least fortune. In 1929, at Mama's urging, the young beauty landed a job as a film extra at 20th Century Fox. This led to Jean's big break in the Laurel and Hardy comedy Double Whoopee.
And immediately people noticed, who is this girl with this, of course, platinum blonde look? And that really, I would say, launched her career in many ways.
The young starlet decided it was time to lose her birth name, Harleyan Carpenter. Not exactly a name you'd want to see up in lights. Joyce Vanderveen is the author of Deadly Illusions.
Her mother's maiden name was Jean Harlow. She loved her mother, so she took the name Harlow and her mother's first name, Jean, and so she also became Jean Harlow. So in order to keep them separated, there was Mama Jean and there was Baby Jean, and ever thereafter known as Mama Jean and Baby Jean.
And it wasn't long before the beautiful Baby Jean caught the eye of agent Arthur Landau.
He was a very good agent. He got her a part with Howard Hughes in his picture. It was a pretty good picture. He was not a bad producer. He had all the money in the world, of course.
The movie was Hell's Angels, produced by Howard Hughes, the most dashing figure in Hollywood. Jean Harlow quickly became his flavor of the month. When we come back, baby Jean turns into the bombshell who knocked the socks off Hollywood. But all the money, glamour, and fame that Hollywood had to offer couldn't keep Harlow off the road to scandal and tragedy. His appetite for teenage girls and support of communism forced him into exile. But what's the truth behind the star they call the Little Tramp? Mysteries and Scandals examines Charlie Chaplin. Tomorrow at 7:30, only on E! Fame ain't a bitch.
You are looking at Hollywood Boulevard, illuminated for miles in honor of the opening of Hell's Angels.
It was the height of the Great Depression, May 27, 1930. But you wouldn't have known it here at Mann's Chinese Theater, where 50,000 people lined the streets for the premiere of Hell's Angels. It starred a beautiful young blonde named Jean Harlow. The producer was dashing millionaire playboy Howard Hughes, who was just 23 at the time. He had just made the most expensive film in history, $4 million. That would just about cover the cappuccino budget for a Hollywood flick today. Hell's Angels marked the beginning of Jean Harlow's rise to the top.
I would like to use this occasion to publicly thank Mr. Hughes for the opportunity he gave me.
Hell's Angels was a booming success and made Jean Harlow a household name. She was a mere 19 years old. Although she was under contract to Hughes, other studios soon began expressing interest.
Howard Hughes signed Jean Harlow before she appeared in Hell's Angels. He was paying her $100 a week. He signed her to a 5-year contract. Within 2 years, really less, she was such a big star that he was loaning her out to other studios for $5,000 a week and paying her $250.
No wonder he was a millionaire. One studio that borrowed Jean from Hughes was MGM, ruled by Louis B. Mayer. One of Mayer's lieutenants was a producer named Paul Byrne, shown here accompanying Jean to the premiere of Hell's Angels. Byrne was infatuated with the young starlet and pushed for her to be cast in the lead for Red-Headed Woman.
Louis B. Mayer, the boss of MGM, really thought that Jean Harlow was kind of a slut. He was not anxious to give her that kind of a part, but Paul Byrne insisted and fought for her, and finally she got the part. That's what made her a star.
The lead in Red-Headed Woman was a coveted one. Every actress in town was after it, including former silent screen star Anita Page, who auditioned for MGM executive Irving Thalberg.
And I asked him if there was a chance that I could get it. And he kidded me. And he said, "Oh, what'll you do for Papa?" Because he was just teasing. And I said, "Oh, I'll just give you the best performance I possibly can." And so he liked that. He laughed, and so that was that.
But Papa gave the part to the platinum-haired Jean Harlow, who agreed to a dye job. There were no hard feelings between Harlow and Page. The two actresses even became good friends.
I did like her so much, even although she got Red-Headed Woman. I wanted that one, and I could have played that right to the, oh, brother.
Oh, brother is right. The film was about a woman who slept her way right to the top and got away with it.
She was absolutely terrific in the movie. And after that, she kept playing, in a sense, the Red-Headed Woman, the same persona. Brassy, showing off her body, and sharp and witty.
Really, it was just too amusing for words. There I was with a cinder in my eye as large as a paving block, with the Grand Duke on one side of me and the Marquis on the other.
Jean Harlow was sexy and sassy, but the one thing that everybody was talking about was that hair. The age of the platinum blonde had arrived with a bang. Alfred Pagano was Jean's hairdresser.
We were creating the platinum blonde. We were creating a new type of lady. It was the first real glamour.
Jean Harlow was the first American film actress ever to dye her hair, specifically to bleach her hair. And you have to remember that when this was done, a woman who bleached her hair was one thing and one thing only. A polite term for it would be a tramp.
I used Purex, just a few drops of Purex, and it would burn. I'd say to Jean, is this hurting you? And she says, a little bit. So I'd use a blower on her, cool it off. Sometimes with magazines, fan it off.
And Jean needed cooling off. All the rules of the day went right out the window with this girl. In fact, Jean Harlow started some very controversial fashion trends.
Never wore undergarments. And I used to say to Jean, my God, you don't have anything on underneath of that. She said, no, I hate lines. She didn't like undergarment lines, pants, bras, anything like that. And she was young enough where she didn't have to have anything hold it up. I mean, you know, God was holding it up for her.
Well, whoever was holding her up had his work cut out for him, all right? So maybe Jean Harlow didn't like panty lines, but the studios loved the lines outside the theater. Harlow's sex appeal was about to explode all over America, and it was just what the doctor ordered to help the country out of the Depression. But the clock was ticking, and Jean Harlow's life was headed for disaster and death. When we come back, we'll examine the events which led to the scandalous and tragic downfall of America's first sex queen. Jean Harlow was only 21 years old and the hottest, sexiest property in Hollywood. It was the early 1930s, and the Depression was taking its toll on America. But Harlow was lifting everybody's spirits. Women all over America were running out to dye their hair to match the platinum blonde bombshells, and their husbands weren't exactly objecting. I'm A.J. Benza, and this is Mysteries and Scandals. Jean Harlow's life was glamorous, but was about to get very messy and very ugly. Things took a turn for the worse when she got involved with Paul Byrne, an MGM executive twice her age.
But if you don't want to marry me, just say so.
Glad you're getting yourself all upset, darling, over here. A little drinky, maybe.
No, not today I don't. Today I get married.
In the summer of 1932, Jean Harlow did get married to Paul Byrne, who was instrumental in casting her in Red-Headed Woman. This was an unusual pairing from the beginning.
They never slept together. He was impotent. He did not tell her. And when I talked to her about him, she said the thing that thrilled her about Paul Byrne is that he was so brilliant. She says, I don't care about his body. It's his mind that I'm in love with. He gives me books to read, and I read them, and then we discuss them.
But you can't read a book after the lights go out. And that's where Paul Byrne just didn't measure up.
Paul Byrne was known as the palace eunuch of MGM, the most beautiful, desirable 21-year-old sex symbol, marrying a 42-year-old, middle-aged, balding, perennial bachelor, had disaster written all over it. And, of course, it only took 2 months before that disaster occurred.
Jean Harlow and her husband, Paul Byrne, were expected here at Jean's mother's house for dinner. It was September 4th, 1932. But the newlyweds had a spat that night. I guess it's not surprising there was a little tension between them, a lot of reading books and not a whole lot of anything else. So Jean came to visit Mama, alone. And while she was gone, the unimaginable happened.
Now, what actually happened, what they said to each other, we will never know. The night of September 4th, 1932, Paul Byrne put a .38 to his head and pulled the trigger, standing nude in front of his dressing room mirror.
But maybe there's more to the story. It seems Paul Byrne had another skeleton in his closet. David Baldwin is a cousin of Jean Harlow's.
The only thing is that Jean didn't know about Paul's common-law marriage with the lady in New York who had a psychiatric history, Dorothy Millette.
It appears Dorothy Millette had shown up at their home, had a scene with Paul Byrne, because under New York law, they were still legally married. They had a common law marriage, which made Paul Byrne a bigamist.
Boy, this guy was a real prize. So was it the crazy woman from Byrne's past who pushed him over the edge? Or did she pull the trigger?
We had to come to the conclusion that Paul Byrne was murdered. He was murdered by Dorothy Millette. All the evidence points to it. There were eyewitnesses who saw her flee the scene of the murder. There was a car waiting for her.
But that's a theory that has never been proven, because no one was ever able to interrogate Dorothy Millette.
They found out she had taken a steamboat to Sacramento, but she never arrived. And a week after Paul Byrne's death, her body was found in the Sacramento River.
So Dorothy wasn't talking, and Paul Byrne didn't have a lot to say either. But whatever happened to Byrne, this was not a good situation for anybody. So now it was time for the Hollywood power brokers to move into action. Damage control began almost immediately.
The butler found the body, called Irving Thalberg, did not call the police.
And Mayor and David Selznick, my boss, showed up over there and found the note that Paul Byrne had left.
The note went like this: Dearest dear, unfortunately, this is the only way to make good the frightful wrong I have done you, and to wipe out my abject humiliation. I love you, Paul. And there was a postscript. You understand that last night was only a comedy.
You couldn't really quite figure it out. Nobody understood the note.
If they destroyed that note, it might look like Jean Harlow had killed her husband. So they did leave the note. They were really trying to just figure out how to save the studio's reputation. Within the next few days, everything blew open because you had Louis B. Mayer's doctor announcing that Paul Byrne was impotent because they were trying to give a motive to his suicide.
The consensus among the players at the time remains that Paul Byrne killed himself. The question is why? Was it the fact that he was married to the biggest sex pot in America and couldn't rise to the occasion? Or was he murdered by his first wife? When we come back, we'll relive the final years of Jean Harlow's sad and scandalous life. It's hard to believe things could get any worse, but they did.
Well, what a story. Constance Allenbury marries bigamist.
If you publish that, you'll have another libel suit on your hands. I'm not a bigamist.
You married me, didn't you?
Ironically, Jean Harlow had married a bigamist, technically speaking, but now Paul Byrne was a dead bigamist. So Jean Harlow had been dealt two crushing blows at once. First, she finds out her husband commits suicide, and then she finds out her marriage to him was probably a big sham. Plus, his common-law wife, or the woman who claimed to be his common-law wife, Dorothy Millette, had just drowned under mysterious circumstances. But somehow, Jean Harlow managed to come through all of that with a lot of class.
Jean Harlow heard about poor Dorothy Millette. Jean Harlow called the coroner in Sacramento and said, give her the finest place in the cemetery, and I will pay for the stone. Make it pretty and add the name Byrne. And Dorothy Millette is buried under the name Dorothy Millette Byrne.
But Jean was a trooper. 3 days after Paul Byrne's suicide, she went back to work on Red Dust with Clark Gable. It was her 10th movie. Jean Harlow, a widow at age 21, recovered beautifully from the scandal of her husband's suicide. Her career was going gangbusters. And in a few short months, Jean was in love again. This time with her favorite cameraman, Hal Rawson.
Rawson was almost a duplicate in appearance to Paul Byrne. He had the little mustache and the dark hair, and he was a very good photographer. Listen, she was grieving. She needed someone to pick her up, and this guy did.
But not for long. The Harlow-Rawson marriage ended after just 7 months. So now Harlow had been through 3 husbands. But in 1935, things started looking up again romantically when she met actor William Powell. She later starred in Libeled Lady, a film with Spencer Tracy and William Powell, which was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture in 1936.
Would I ask you to do this thing for me if I didn't consider you practically as my wife?
Well, would you ask your wife to hook up with that ape?
The ape objects.
When William Powell came along, this was her greatest joy, and they had a very, very happy time together. And I know that they were planning marriage because she told me so.
But Jean's happiness was to be short-lived. In 1937, while filming Saratoga with Clark Gable, 26-year-old Jean took ill. It had been apparent to many of her co-workers that Jean was not in good health. What nobody realized was that Jean Harlow was slowly dying.
By May of 1937, she had been sick, basically, for the last 18 months, and she was dying of kidney failure all through the making of Saratoga. And when you watch the movie, it's almost hard to believe that no one would go to her and say, "You don't look well. Have you been to a doctor?"
As a Christian Scientist, Jean's mother didn't believe in doctors. However, there is still a difference of opinion as to whether or not her mother would allow Jean to seek medical care.
She had a very bad infection, and her mother did not take her to the doctor. When she finally did, it was too late.
Her mother was a Christian Scientist, but never held medical care from Jean. I have all of Jean's Good Samaritan medical records.
The one person who finally convinced Jean to go to the hospital was not her mother, but the new love of her life, William Powell.
The fact that he came to see her one day when she was so sick, and he said to her, "Jean, how many fingers do you see?" And she said, I don't see any fingers. And he knew then that there was something very, very wrong, and so he called his doctor and had her admitted.
It wasn't as if anyone could have saved Jean Harlow in those days. There was no kidney transplants, there was no dialysis, so she was doomed.
Jean Harlow died on June 7th, 1937. She was just 26 years old. Hollywood was in shock.
And I woke up in the morning, and the first thing I did was I went to look and get the newspaper. And right on the big thing. It said that she had died.
Ah, come on out of the trenches. I'm not going to throw any bombs. I'm harmless.
Yes, of course. You're as harmless as a revolution. Well, don't forget your cigarettes.
I won't. I know an exit line when I hear it.
Jean Harlow's funeral was the most spectacular in Hollywood history. William Powell was so distraught he practically had to be carried through the ceremony. The grief-stricken Powell bought 3 crypts at Forest Lawn. One for Jean, one for Mama Jean, and one for himself.
He was not buried in the crypt at Forest Lawn with Jean Harlow, which he paid for. That 3rd crypt remains empty, and only Jean Harlow and her mother are buried there. And the sign over the crypt says, "Our baby," because everybody who knew Jean Harlow called her the baby.
And at 26, she was a baby. So here they are, Mother Jean and Baby Jean, together for eternity. Jean Harlow was Tinseltown's first platinum blonde bombshell. She changed the face of Hollywood, not to mention the hair color, forever. But what a shame that she was never able to fully appreciate the remarkable impact she had on a state of mind called Hollywood. I'm A.J. Benza.